The warm summer breeze drifted through downtown Memphis as people hustled about their weekend routines. Carter's convenience store, a beloved neighborhood fixture for over 30 years, was experiencing its usual Saturday afternoon rush. The small bell above the door chimed continuously as customers streamed in and out, their shopping bags rustling and conversations creating a gentle buzz throughout the store. Among the weekend shoppers stood a young girl, her debate team jacket slightly worn at the edges from frequent use. She was absently scrolling through her phone, reviewing her notes for an upcoming regional debate competition while waiting in the checkout line. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen as she memorized key points about environmental policy, occasionally mouthing the words to herself. The store's familiar scent of fresh coffee and newly stocked snacks filled the air. Behind the counter, Mr. Carter, the store owner, worked efficiently with his newest employee, teaching her how to handle the weekend rush. The young cashier nodded attentively, her hands moving faster with each transaction as she gained confidence. The line moved steadily, though not quickly enough for some customers. The girl occasionally glanced up from her phone to move forward, maintaining a polite distance from the person ahead of her. Her mind was focused on the debate competition, where she would be representing her school as team captain. The position was a source of pride not only for her, but for her entire family, especially her father. Through the store's large front windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the linoleum floor. The security camera in the corner blinked silently, its red light a quiet reminder of the safety measures in place. Outside, police cruisers occasionally passed by on their regular patrol route, their presence a familiar sight in this peaceful neighborhood. Several customers in line chatted casually about their weekend plans, a backyard barbecue here, a child's soccer game there. The girl smiled briefly at a small child who waved at her from a shopping cart. The peaceful scene was typical of this community where most people knew each other, if not by name then by sight. The girl's phone buzzed with a message from her dad, asking if she could pick up some coffee on her way home. He was working late again, as police chiefs often do, but never too busy to check in on his daughter. She quickly added a pack of his favorite coffee to her small basket, which already contained study snacks and energy drinks for her upcoming debate preparation session. Near the magazine rack, an elderly couple discussed the latest headlines, their voices a gentle murmur adding to the store's peaceful atmosphere. The girl had known them since she was small. They lived 3 houses down from her family and always attended the neighborhood block parties. This was the kind of community where people looked out for each other, where differences were celebrated rather than feared. The line continued to inch forward. Through the windows, more people could be seen approaching the store, including a man who seemed to be in quite a hurry, his face set in a hard frown as he walked briskly toward the entrance. The girl returned to her debate notes, unaware that the peaceful Saturday afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn. The scene was so ordinary, so typical of a weekend afternoon in this part of Memphis, that no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. The girl shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her debate team jacket catching the fluorescent light overhead. In just a few moments, this quiet convenience store would become the setting for an incident that would shake the community and lead to unexpected changes. As the line moved forward again, the girl looked up briefly to see the man from outside entering the store, the bell chiming more forcefully this time as the door swung open with unnecessary force. The peaceful atmosphere of the store seemed to shift slightly, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Yet for now, everything remained calm. The last moments of normalcy before an ordinary day would become anything but ordinary. The peaceful atmosphere of Carter's convenience store shattered like thin glass when the man burst through the entrance. The door's bell jangled discordantly, drawing startled looks from nearby customers. He was tall, probably in his mid-40s, wearing a contractor's vest with paint splatters across the front. His work boots left dusty impressions on the recently mopped floor as he stomped toward the end of the checkout line. From the moment he entered, it was clear something wasn't right. His face was flushed red, and he kept checking his watch with aggressive flicks of his wrist. The elderly couple by the magazine rack exchanged worried glances before quietly moving away from his path. Even Mr. Carter, who had seen all sorts of customers in his 30 years of running the store, straightened up behind the counter, his experienced eyes tracking the man's movements. The line wasn't particularly long for a Saturday afternoon, maybe 8 people deep, but to the contractor, it might as well have been a mile. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, muttering under his breath about wasted time and incompetent service. The young cashier, still learning the ropes, tried to maintain her composure as she heard his complaints, her hands slightly trembling as she made change for the current customer. The girl with the debate team jacket stood 3 people ahead of him, still absorbed in her competition preparation. When the line moved forward, she took a moment to respond, creating a small gap between her and the customer ahead. It was nothing unusual, the kind of minor delay that happens dozens of times every day in stores across the country. But for the contractor, it was apparently the last straw. "Hey!" His voice boomed through the store, causing several customers to jump. "Move up. Some of us have actual work to do." The girl looked up, startled, and quickly stepped forward to close the gap. But the contractor wasn't finished. His face grew darker as he focused on her, his eyes narrowing at her debate team jacket. The other customers in line began to shift uncomfortably. A middle-aged woman in scrubs took half a step forward, positioning herself slightly closer to the girl. Near the drink cooler, a tall man in a business suit paused his shopping, watching the situation unfold with growing concern. The contractor's complaints grew louder and more pointed. What started as grumbling about the line evolved into something uglier. Comments about certain people not knowing how to act in public, remarks about their kind always causing delays. Each word seemed to drop like a stone in the quiet store, creating ripples of tension that spread through the aisles. Mr. Carter stepped out from behind the counter, his movement deliberate and calm. "Sir," he called out, his voice firm but professional, "everyone here is a valued customer. Please keep your comments respectful." The contractor's head snapped toward Mr. Carter, his face twisting into an even deeper scowl. The girl maintained her composure, her debate training evident in her controlled breathing and straight posture. She didn't engage with the man's provocations, but she didn't cower either. Her phone was now clutched tightly in her hand, her debate notes forgotten as she focused on maintaining her dignity in the face of such hostility. Other customers had stopped their shopping entirely. The store had grown eerily quiet except for the contractor's increasingly aggressive commentary. The soft music playing through the store's speakers seemed jarringly inappropriate now, a cheerful pop song providing a bizarre soundtrack to the growing tension. The line continued to move forward, but now everyone was watching the contractor from the corners of their eyes. The woman in scrubs had pulled out her phone, holding it low but ready. The man in the business suit had moved closer to the checkout area, his shopping basket dangling forgotten from his hand. The girl reached the front of the line, placing her items on the counter with steady hands. The young cashier tried to ring up her purchases quickly, clearly anxious about the angry man just a few feet away. The contractor's running commentary grew louder, more specific, more targeted. His complaints about the line had evolved into a full-blown tirade about society, about people knowing their place, about the way things used to be. The tension in the store had reached a breaking point. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed muted, as if the very appliances were holding their breath. What happened next would turn this ordinary Saturday afternoon into a moment that would change their community forever. The contractor took a step forward, his work boots heavy on the linoleum floor, his face contorted with an anger that went far beyond simple impatience at a checkout line. The young girl had just finished paying for her items when she turned to face the contractor, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. "Sir," she said politely, her debate training evident in her measured tone, "your comments are inappropriate. We're all just trying to shop here." Her words, though calm and reasonable, seemed to flip a switch in the contractor's mind. His face, already red with anger, turned almost purple. The veins in his neck stood out as he took another step forward, invading her personal space. The other customers could see his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "You don't tell me what's inappropriate," he snarled, his voice rising to fill the small store. "You people think you can just—" He didn't finish his sentence. Instead, his right hand shot out, shoving the girl hard enough to send her stumbling backward into a display of potato chips. Time seemed to slow down. The crash of bags hitting the floor sounded like an explosion in the shocked silence. For a split second, nobody moved, as if everyone was too stunned to process what had just happened. Then, like a dam breaking, the store erupted into action. Mr. Carter vaulted over the counter with surprising agility for his age, positioning himself between the girl and the contractor. The woman in scrubs rushed forward to help the girl regain her balance, while the man in the business suit grabbed the contractor's arm to prevent him from advancing further. "You just assaulted a minor," the woman in scrubs said firmly, her phone already recording. "On camera." She nodded toward the security cameras in the corner, their red lights blinking steadily. The contractor followed her gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The young cashier's hands shook as she reached for the store's phone. "I'm calling 911, she announced, her voice wavering but determined. Other customers had formed a protective semicircle around the girl, who had regained her footing and was brushing off her debate team jacket. Despite the chaos around her, the girl remained remarkably composed. She pulled out her own phone, her fingers steady as she dialed. She didn't say anything about who she was calling, but there was a quiet confidence in her movements that suggested she knew exactly what to do. The contractor, suddenly aware of the crowd's hostile murmurs and the phones recording his every move, tried to backtrack. She got in my way," he stammered, but his words were met with scoffs and head shakes from the witnesses. The man in the business suit maintained his firm grip on the contractor's arm, even as the latter tried to shake himself free. "Nobody's leaving until the police arrive," Mr. Carter announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had owned this store for 3 decades. What happened here wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. Through the store's windows, curious passers-by had started to gather, drawn by the commotion inside. A young mother quickly ushered her children away from the scene, while an off-duty nurse stepped inside to offer assistance if needed. The girl stood straight, one hand gently rubbing her shoulder where she had hit the display. There were no tears in her eyes, no trembling in her limbs, just a quiet dignity that made her seem older than her years. When she spoke into her phone, her voice was clear and precise. "Dad, I need you to come to Carter's store. There's been an incident." The contractor's face had begun to shift from anger to something else, something that looked like the first stirrings of fear. Perhaps he was finally realizing the gravity of what he had done. Perhaps he was calculating the consequences of assaulting a minor in front of multiple witnesses. Or perhaps he was wondering why this teenage girl seemed so calm about calling her father. Outside, the sound of approaching sirens began to grow louder. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, highlighting the scattered potato chip bags on the floor, the protective stance of the customers around the girl, the nervous sweat now beading on the contractor's forehead. The girl slipped her phone back into her pocket, adjusted her debate team jacket, and waited. The entire store seemed to be holding its breath, sensing that this was just the beginning. The contractor tried one last time to pull away from the man holding him. The wailing sirens grew closer, their pitch rising as multiple police vehicles approached the store. The contractor's face had lost all its previous color, leaving him pale and sweating under the fluorescent lights. In just a few moments, he would understand exactly why the girl had remained so calm, and why this ordinary Saturday afternoon would become a day he would regret for the rest of his life. The wail of police sirens filled the air as 3 patrol cars pulled up outside Carter's convenience store, their blue and red lights painting the storefront in alternating colors. The gathered crowd outside parted as officers quickly exited their vehicles, moving with practiced efficiency toward the entrance. Inside, the contractor had grown increasingly agitated, his earlier bravado crumbling as the reality of his situation began to sink in. The man in the business suit maintained his firm grip on the contractor's arm, while other customers continued recording the scene on their phones. The store's bell chimed as the first 2 officers entered, their faces professional and alert as they assessed the situation. They were followed by more officers, each moving purposefully to secure the scene. The lead officer, a veteran with gray at his temples, immediately began giving quiet, efficient directions to his colleagues. "Everyone please remain calm and stay where you are," he announced clearly. "We'll need statements from all witnesses." His eyes scanned the store, taking in the scattered chip display, the protective circle of customers, and the young girl still standing tall in her debate team jacket. The contractor started to speak, but was quickly silenced by the officer's raised hand. "Sir, please remain quiet. You'll have your chance to make a statement." The professional tone carried an unmistakable edge of authority that made the contractor snap his mouth shut. Then came a sound that made everyone turn toward the entrance, heavy, measured footsteps approaching the store. Through the windows, they could see an imposing figure emerging from an unmarked police vehicle. The police chief had arrived. He entered the store with calm authority, his uniform pristine, his badge catching the fluorescent light. The other officers straightened noticeably, their respect evident in their posture. The chief's face remained neutral as he surveyed the scene, but those watching closely might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes when he saw the scattered display and his daughter's slightly disheveled jacket. The contractor's face drained of what little color remained as recognition dawned. His eyes darted between the police chief and the young girl, making the connection that would change everything. The man in the business suit felt the contractor's arm go limp in his grip. The chief's first action spoke volumes about his character. He turned to the lead officer and said clearly, "Lieutenant, I'm recusing myself from direct involvement in this case due to personal connection. Please proceed with your investigation according to standard protocols." The girl straightened her jacket and gave her father a small nod, communicating volumes in that simple gesture. The chief returned the nod, his pride in his daughter's composure evident despite his professional demeanor. Mr. Carter stepped forward, holding out the store's security footage that he'd already queued up. "Officers, we have clear video of the entire incident," he said, his voice steady. The woman in scrubs and several other customers held up their phones as well. "And we all have recordings of what happened." The contractor seemed to shrink into himself as he watched multiple witnesses step forward. The young cashier, though still shaken, provided a clear account of how events unfolded. Each customer added their perspective, building an undeniable picture of what had transpired. Through it all, the police chief maintained his professional distance, though anyone watching could see the cost of that restraint in the tight set of his shoulders. He stood near his daughter, close enough to show support, but far enough away to maintain the integrity of the investigation. The lead officer coordinated his team with quiet efficiency, taking statements, collecting evidence, and ensuring everyone's rights were protected, including the contractors. This wasn't about revenge or personal justice, it was about the law being applied fairly and professionally. Outside, more people had gathered, drawn by the police presence. Word had begun to spread about what had happened, how a man had assaulted a teenage girl in broad daylight, not knowing she was the police chief's daughter. But what impressed the onlookers most wasn't the family connection, it was how both father and daughter handled the situation with dignity and respect for proper procedure. The contractor, now fully understanding the magnitude of his actions, had gone from aggressive to almost catatonic. As officers began to read him his rights, his earlier racist bravado was replaced by the dawning realization that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, not because of who the girl's father was, but because he had let his prejudice lead him to assault an innocent young woman in front of numerous witnesses. The chief turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the weight of both his position and his personal stake in the situation. "I want to thank everyone who stepped forward to protect my daughter and to serve as witnesses. You've shown what our community stands for. This incident will be handled according to the law, with no special treatment, positive or negative, due to my position or my relationship to the victim." His words carried a powerful message about justice, fairness, and the importance of standing up for what's right. The gathered crowd nodded in approval, understanding they were witnessing not just an arrest, but a lesson in how justice should work, equally for everyone, regardless of who they are or who they know. The atmosphere in Carter's convenience store had transformed completely. Where minutes ago there had been tension and fear, now there was a sense of justice being carried out with quiet dignity. The contractor stood between two officers, his earlier aggression replaced by a dawning horror as he fully grasped the situation he created for himself. Local residents who frequented the store watched as reality hit the contractor like a physical force. His eyes kept darting between the police chief and his daughter, his mind clearly racing as he pieced together the implications of his actions. The man who had been so bold, so aggressive just moments ago, now looked small under the fluorescent lights. "I didn't," he started to say, but his voice trailed off. What could he say? That he didn't know who she was? That somehow made it okay. The absurdity of that defense seemed to strike him even as the words died in his throat. The other customers watched his internal struggle with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness, satisfaction that justice would be served, sadness that such prejudice still existed in their community. The police chief maintained his professional demeanor as he stepped aside to let his officers do their jobs. His actions spoke volumes to everyone present. He was a man with every reason to be angry, to want personal revenge, yet he chose to let the system work as it should. He stood near his daughter, close enough to show support, but far enough away to make it clear he wasn't interfering with the investigation. The young girl's debate team jacket had become a symbol of sorts. The contractor couldn't stop staring at it, perhaps finally seeing it for what it really represented, not just a school activity, but dedication, intelligence, and achievement. The same jacket he had sneered at minutes ago now seemed to mock his prejudices. Mr. Carter stepped forward again, speaking to the lead investigator. "I've owned this store for 30 years, he said, his voice carrying in the quiet space. "We've never had anything like this happen here. This is a community where people look out for each other, regardless of who they are." Several customers nodded in agreement, some of them having shopped at Carter's since they were children themselves. The woman in scrubs who had been recording approached the lead officer, her phone still in hand. "I have clear footage of everything that happened," she said, including all the things he said before he got physical. Other customers stepped forward as well, each offering their recordings and statements. The contractor seemed to shrink further with each witness. Outside, word had spread quickly through the neighborhood. People gathered on the sidewalk, not with anger or hostility, but with a quiet determination to show what their community really stood for. Several of the girls' classmates had arrived, still wearing their own debate team jackets. They stood together, a visual reminder of the future generation who wouldn't tolerate such behavior. The contractor's construction truck, parked haphazardly near the store, stood out with its company logo clearly visible. Someone in the crowd was already on the phone, presumably calling the construction company to report their employees' behavior. Actions, as the contractor was quickly learning, had consequences far beyond the immediate moment. Inside, the lead officer continued taking statements with methodical precision. Each witness described not just the assault, but the build-up to it, the racial comments, the aggressive behavior, the clear targeting of the young girl. The officer's notebook filled with detailed accounts, building an airtight case that would have been just as strong regardless of who the victim's father was. The young cashier, who had watched everything unfold, found her voice. She was just standing in line, looking at her phone, she told the officers, her initial fear replaced by indignation. She was doing nothing wrong. Nothing. Her simple statement seemed to cut through any remaining attempts at justification the contractor might have been considering. The police chief's daughter maintained her composure throughout, occasionally checking her phone as debate team members sent messages of support. She answered the officers' questions clearly and precisely, her debate training evident in her organized recollection of events. She didn't play up her father's position or seek special treatment. She didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. The contractor's transformation was almost complete now. The man who had walked into the store full of misplaced anger and prejudice now stood deflated, facing the consequences of his actions. His eyes kept returning to the police chief's badge, gleaming under the store lights, a symbol of the authority and justice he had so foolishly challenged. But it wasn't just the badge that had broken him, it was the dignity with which both father and daughter handled the situation. It was the community's united stand against his behavior. It was the realization that his actions would have consequences, not because of who he had attacked, but because what he did was fundamentally wrong. As officers prepared to escort him out, the contractor looked one last time at the girl he had assaulted. She stood tall in her debate jacket, surrounded by community support, the very image of the future he had fought against, a future that was coming whether he liked it or not. The next few weeks brought a wave of changes that rippled through the community. The incident at Carter's convenience store had struck a nerve, becoming a catalyst for important conversations about respect, justice, and equality. The local newspaper covered the story on its front page, not because of who was involved, but because of how the situation was handled. The contractor faced the justice system with his head bowed, a stark contrast to his behavior that Saturday afternoon. The district attorney's office moved forward with assault charges, enhanced by hate crime specifications due to the clear racial motivation of the attack. The security footage from the store, combined with numerous witness videos and statements, left no room for denial. His construction company didn't wait for the legal proceedings to conclude. Within days of the incident, they released a statement firmly denouncing his actions and denouncing his immediate termination. "We build communities," their statement read. "We don't tear them down with hate and prejudice." The courthouse was packed for his arraignment. Community members filled the benches not with anger or hatred, but with a quiet determination to see justice served. The police chief's daughter sat with perfect posture in the front row, still wearing her debate team jacket. It had become a symbol of sorts, a reminder that you can't judge someone's worth by their appearance. The contractor's lawyer had advised him to stay quiet, but during his court appearance, something unexpected happened. Looking at the young girl and her father, he asked the judge for permission to speak. His voice trembled as he addressed the court. "I've spent 3 weeks thinking about what I did," he said, his voice barely carrying through the quiet courtroom. "I've lost my job, my reputation, and probably my freedom. But that's not what keeps me awake at night. What haunts me is the look in that young lady's eyes when I pushed her, not fear, but disappointment. Disappointment that people like me still exist." The judge, a veteran of the bench who had heard countless apologies, leaned forward slightly. This one felt different. The contractor continued, his words coming faster now, as if he couldn't hold them back. "I saw the security video during my first meeting with my lawyer. I watched myself transform from a man annoyed about a line into something I never thought I was. My own children couldn't look me in the eye when they saw that video. My neighbors crossed the street to avoid me. And they're right to do so." The courtroom remained silent as he spoke. Even the usual shuffling and whispers had stopped. The contractor's shoulders slumped as he continued. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want everyone to know that I understand now. It shouldn't have taken this to teach me, but it did. And I'm ready to face whatever consequences come my way." The judge considered his words carefully before announcing the sentence. The contractor would serve time, but the judge also included mandatory diversity training and community service hours. "Your actions hurt this community," the judge stated firmly. "Your rehabilitation should help heal it." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around the police chief and his daughter. They wanted to know how they felt about the sentence. The chief's response exemplified the professionalism he'd shown throughout the ordeal. "Justice isn't about revenge," he said, his daughter standing proud beside him. "It's about accountability and growth. If this incident leads to positive change, not just in one person, but in our community, then something good will have come from it." Local community centers reported a surge in requests for diversity and inclusion workshops. Schools invited speakers to discuss racism and its impact on society. The incident had opened eyes and started conversations that were long overdue. The girls' debate team dedicated their next competition to discussing systemic change and community building. They swept the tournament, their arguments strengthened by recent real-world experience. Their victory made the local news, not because of the incident at the store, but because of their compelling vision for a better future. Carter's convenience store became an unexpected hub for community organizing. Mr. Carter put up a small bulletin board where people could post information about upcoming Unity events and workshops. The young cashier who had witnessed everything that day became an active participant in organizing these events. The contractor's former construction company went beyond just firing him. They established a scholarship fund for minority students interested in construction and engineering. "We want to be part of the solution," the company president announced. "We want to build bridges, not just with steel and concrete, but between people." Weeks turned into months, and the incident could have faded from memory. But instead, it became a reference point, a moment when one community chose to respond to hatred not with more hatred, but with justice, education, and growth. The police chief's daughter had shown that standing tall in the face of prejudice could inspire others to stand up too. 6 months after the incident at Carter's convenience store, the city council chamber was packed to capacity. People stood along the walls, their faces expectant as they waited for the evening's main event. The police chief's daughter sat in the front row, her debate team jacket now adorned with medals from state championships. The incident that could have torn the community apart had instead become a catalyst for real change. Tonight was about recognizing that transformation and ensuring it continued. The city council had gathered to vote on a comprehensive community initiative that had grown from the seeds of that dramatic Saturday afternoon. The young girl was scheduled to speak first. As she approached the podium, the room fell silent. She looked different now, more confident, if that was possible. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber as she began to share her story. 6 months ago, I was just a student preparing for a debate competition, she started. Today, I stand before you as someone who has seen both the worst and the best of our community. What happened to me at that store was terrible, but what happened afterward? That showed me who we really are. She went on to describe the changes she'd witnessed. The local police department, under her father's leadership, had expanded its community outreach programs. Officers now regularly visited schools to build relationships with young people. The program was so successful that other cities were looking to copy it. Mr. Carter's store had transformed too. The spot where she had been pushed was now home to a community bulletin board covered with flyers for unity events, workshop announcements, and success stories. The young cashier who witnessed everything that day had started a youth mentorship program that met at the store after hours. But the biggest change, she continued, wasn't in any program or policy. It was in how we started talking to each other. Real conversations about hard topics. People sharing their experiences, their fears, their hopes. We stopped pretending everything was perfect and started working to make things better. The contractor's story had become part of these discussions too, but not in the way many expected. After serving his sentence and completing his mandated training, he had asked to speak at community meetings. He shared his journey from hatred to understanding, not to excuse his actions, but to help others recognize and change their own prejudices. The police chief watched his daughter from his seat on the council, pride evident in his expression. His handling of the incident had earned him national recognition, but he remained focused on local impact. Under his leadership, the police department had become a model for community-oriented policing. The initiative we're discussing tonight, the girl continued, isn't just about preventing another incident like mine. It's about building the community we want to be. It's about making sure every person who walks into a store, or down the street, or into a classroom feels safe and respected. The proposed initiative included funding for education programs, community events, and training workshops. But it went beyond that, establishing a community oversight committee and creating channels for open dialogue between different groups within the city. As she concluded her speech, she held up her latest debate trophy. I won this last week, she said, not because of what happened 6 months ago, but because that experience taught me something important. When you stand up for what's right, you have to do it with both strength and compassion. You have to be firm about justice but open to growth and change. The city council members leaned forward in their seats, clearly moved by her words. The police chief's daughter had become more than just a victim of a racist attack. She had become a symbol of how to respond to hatred with dignity and purpose. The council's vote was unanimous. As the gavel fell, the chamber erupted in applause. People hugged and shook hands, some wiping away tears. This wasn't just a policy victory, it was a community choosing its future. Outside the chamber, a small group gathered around the police chief and his daughter. The woman in scrubs who had recorded the original incident was there, along with Mr. Carter and several debate team members. They had become an informal support group, meeting regularly to discuss community progress. You know what still amazes me? Mr. Carter said, shaking his head. That day could have gone so differently. If you had responded with anger, if your father had let personal feelings override his professional judgment, if our community had chosen revenge over justice, we wouldn't be here today. The police chief put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Sometimes, he said quietly, the worst moments bring out the best in people, but only if we choose to learn and grow from them. As they walked out into the evening air, they passed a new mural on the courthouse wall. It showed diverse hands joined together, forming a circle of unity. Below it, a simple phrase captured the spirit of their transformed community, standing together, growing together. The girl paused to look at the mural, her debate team jacket catching the last rays of sunlight. 6 months ago, she had been a student preparing for a competition. Now she was part of something much bigger. a community that had learned to face its problems with courage, address injustice with wisdom, and build a better future with hope.